all of our YouTube fans are desperate for more content. So we gotta feed the beast at this point. And we appreciate, so I appreciate in advance whatever guidance and wisdom you can impart on our young, impressionable doctoral students.
Well, my main guidance is don't do what I did, but.
That's what I tell them too, don't do what I did. Okay, thanks again. And we'll work on turning you into a YouTube star very shortly. Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce Carolyn Flammer, who is Associate Professor of Strategy and Innovation, as well as a Dean's Research Scholar at the Questrom School of Business at Boston University. She previously served on the faculty of the Ivy School at the University of Western Ontario. She earned her PhD in economics at the University of St. Gallen. She serves as Associate Editor for SMJ and has served as a Special Issue Associate Editor for Management Science. She serves on the editorial board of AMJ. Has won numerous awards, including the famous Glick Best Paper Award from the BPS division, or STR division. I guess back in 2014 it would have been the BPS division. She is chair of the Academic Advisory Committee of the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment. So she's also a fellow of the Susilo Institute. I don't know what that is. Maybe she'll tell us. Her research interests are in competitive strategy at the intersection of corporate governance, impact investing, corporate social responsibility, climate change, and innovation, with a focus on the antecedents and implications of companies' investments in sustainable practices. Her research examines how and under which conditions firms can enhance their competitiveness and long-term profitability while having a positive impact on society and the natural environment. So please join me in welcoming Carolyn Flammer. Okay, well,
Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be invited. So thank you so much. By the way, I've greatly enjoyed all your sessions before, all the hot seats, so to speak. I can guarantee you my answers are most likely fundamentally different from what you've heard before.
Very good. Very good.
So watch out what you're asking.
Okay. Well, I don't think there's many surprises, although I did get an email from someone suggesting a new question. I can't remember what that was. So I'll maybe, if I have time, I'll look it up. But thank you again for joining us. And, I like to, as you know, start these sessions with the question of, how you got to this profession of being a strategy professor in the first place. Because as I like to say, I've never heard a 10-year-old say, "Mommy, I want to be a strategy professor when I grow up." So I figure there must be usually some kind of unusual or indirect story behind it. So tell us your story.
How much time do you have?
3 minutes.
No, so it is a good question. And back in those days, I had no idea. And I think my path was anything but straightforward. So let me try to keep it short. So as you may know, I'm from Switzerland. As you may not know is I come from a very humble family. So I'm the very first one who has ever gone off to study at the university. So anyway, so I had no idea what I wanted, but I had a very strong urge to learn more, to study more, to understand. And so I went to the university. I studied business, economics, and law. And soon I developed a very strong interest in economics, especially development economics and international relations. And for actually quite some time, I was very interested in pursuing a career in international development and work for something like World Bank, United Nations, some other developing agency, or diplomacy. So diplomatic service, I think that's what you call it in the US, correct? Yes. Diplomatic service for Switzerland. Now for...
So do we call you ambassador now?
Oh,
Ambassador Flammer?
Not quite.
Okay.
I think you're gonna enjoy that story. So So in Switzerland, in order to get into these organizations or into diplomacy, you need to speak several languages. So I speak about 6. You need to have international experience, ideally in developing countries, so work experience in developing countries, and ideally you pursue a PhD. And so this is pretty much what I did. So that's also one of the reasons why I went to Costa Rica and became a hotel manager for a while. I loved it, so I almost didn't come back. It was the best time of my life. But at some point,
Where was that?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. Oh wow.
It's beautiful. And but at some point, I had this urge to learn more, study more, get brain food, go back to school. So I did my PhD, or I was in the PhD, and so during the PhD, at some point, I was getting close into getting into the diplomatic service. So I was studying for that. I passed all the exams, but for one.
Oh.
Psych test.
Oh my.
So it's not that I failed it. It's rather I didn't quite fit the profile they were looking for. So you need to imagine there are tons of questions like, are you proactive? Do you take leadership? Do you stand up for what is right? Do you question established knowledge? You get the picture? And so then you need to answer like, I strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. And then based on those answers, they design a psych profile for you. And so if you think about 3 circles, an inner circle, middle circle, outside circle, what they really look for is somebody in the middle, correct? Somebody who's quiet, who nods, who follows the orders, etc. I didn't quite fit that profile.
You weren't obedient enough. You were too independent-minded.
I shall not say which circle I was on the outer circle or the inner circle. So anyway, so what is quite amusing nowadays was actually not that amusing back in the days because it did take out the wind of my sails.
Sure.
And so I had to rethink, okay, so what am I going to do? So I was already in a PhD program, kind of in the middle. And I'm like, okay, what I'm going to do with my life now that this is off the table. And luckily, I got a fellowship from the Swiss National Science Foundation to study abroad, be a visiting student, and I got accepted into NYU, New York University. Mm-hmm. And I spent there 2 years, which was great. And then 2 things happened. One, I won the green card lottery.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So winning the green card lottery is essentially, and at first I thought it was a joke because I applied like 2 years before, and at some point I got this letter in my mail, and I thought like, I think this can't be true. So what it means winning the green card lottery is essentially you have permission to proceed with the process. So you don't have it yet, but to proceed, you need to show some kind of income. The other thing that happened is we were writing 2009. What comes to your mind? 2009?
Not good economic times, that's for sure.
Correct. And so my back then boyfriend, nowadays husband, he was also a PhD student in New York. His scholarship got cut and they didn't finance a 6th year. This might sound slightly familiar to some of you or some of the PhDs in this world currently. And so essentially I had 2 options, correct? So one option is go back to Switzerland, get a job, forget about the green card. And I have no idea how I would have gotten back to the US where my boyfriend was.
Right.
The other option is get a job, some teaching job, get food on the table, be the sugar mama of my husband and to finance the rest of his studies, and proceed with the green card application. And so this is basically what I did. So I took on a job in a local school, taught like 8 courses a year, 7 to 8 preps a year.
Wow.
So ever since then, I know, like, you can throw whatever course you want me to teach. I can teach it. I will survive. I will survive. And actually, teaching evaluations were quite good. But, you know, so it was an intense period of time. But so once he landed the job, so he got a job at MIT. So my investment paid off. So once he got the job there, I applied for a postdoc, and that's why then I did a postdoc for 2 years, and only then I went on the academic job market and placed at Ivy. So that's the long story, trying to keep it short, but this is so anyone who is kind of in a PhD, my advice, don't do what I did.
It's a complicated story.
Don't, you know, if you have a choice, correct? If you have a choice, don't do it.
Okay. So you studied economics in your PhD, right? And you were at St. Gallen, I guess, because you were aiming for the diplomatic program.
No, not necessarily because of diplomacy, but so St. Gallen is the best school in basically economics, business, and law in the region, and it's typically students. You know, all the universities are really quite good and quite cheap, and it's just not in the mindset really of the people, at least back in the days, but I think it's still true. It's not in the mindset that you go off and do the PhD somewhere else. And the other reason why I stayed close to home was my mom was seriously ill, so that's why I wanted to stay close and take care of her and be with my family. But it is one of the best schools
Yes.
in the region.
Yes. So tell us, for the benefit of the PhD students here. So, well, maybe I should ask this first. So you were very excited when you mentioned visiting at NYU. Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like, being a visiting doctoral student there.
So I was in the econ department.
Right.
It was a great learning experience. I mean, it was a fantastic learning experience, brilliant minds surrounded. I would say this is also an observation I make with visiting students in our other schools. I would say as a visiting student, you need to put in extra effort to be integrated. I see some nods on the Zoom videos. I mean, it's a really great experience. You need to go out of your way, and you need to approach people. Everybody's busy and they have their own network, correct? So it is up to you to make that effort, but I think it's worth it.
Right. Who did you work with at NYU?
And I think, just to follow up, sorry.
Yes.
I think for many who actually do a PhD in Europe or outside of the US, Canada, doing a postdoc can be extremely valuable, because also many of the PhD programs for example, in Europe, where I'm most familiar with, they are fairly short, correct? So some of those PhD programs are like 3 years or 4 years long. And so if you really want to go in the academic market, it's hard. It's hard to compete with somebody who went to a US school. And so a postdoc can really help you on one hand, it's not really extending the clock, but it gives you some extra years, and it can help you build up your network. So I think it can be a very wise idea to do, I would say.
Right. Well, I noticed that you were also teaching simultaneously with your postdoc. Is that right?
Yes.
So how did that work?
It was good. It was good. I mean, I've been working, I've been financing my studies throughout my life. I've been working since I'm underage. And it was actually great because I was actually teaching like in an academic environment, correct? It's not that I was selling chicken or something else like I used to do beforehand. So it's, I think getting classroom experience. So, okay, let me put it this way. During the PhD, as well as during the postdoc, I would advise anyone to focus on research. Focus on research. But there might be some life circumstances where you need to teach. And then actually the teaching experience helps you, I would say it helps you later on, because at the time you're an assistant professor and you start teaching, you know,
Right.
you come with this experience with you, correct? Like it's you don't feel like the total rookie anymore.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's a smoother transition if you've already had that experience. Yes, definitely.
But again, you know, if you have a choice, really, I've been PhD coordinator in our department at BU, and I drill it into our PhD students. Focus, tool up on methods, correct? Learn, study, but focus on your research.
Exactly. So, so tell us a little bit about how you, first of all, maybe remind us what your dissertation topic was, because it's been a few years.
Will you remind me, or I have to
I'll let you do it. And then tell us maybe a little bit about the process that led to the dissertation. How did you find that dissertation topic?
So I was very interested in economics, especially development economics. And so in development economics, a key factor for the development, social and economic development of countries is human capital. Yet for the poor population, financing education is tricky, correct? They have funding concerns, and they don't have access to regular banks and bank credit. So that's ruled out. And so what I was looking in my research, what I did is looking at sustainable ways how to finance education through self-reinforcing contracts. So very much kind of microfinance related way of financing. And so, so now you wonder, how is this related to my current research?
Well, there's that, and then there's also what was the specific research question there?
So, well, you know, it was a book, so that's really the time of, you know, it's a different. I'm not that old, but it's a different culture, different. Back in those days, the typical thing was you basically wrote a book.
Right.
So it's not really. I guess the research question is, how can you design a contract that allows poor people to finance their education, which is tricky to some extent because it's human capital. You can't design a contract like for other things because then you're in slavery, correct?
Right, exactly. There's no collateral. There's no collateral.
Correct. And now, so let me move fast forward, correct? So I was at MIT, I was in a business school, and I figured it probably, given that I'm in a business school, it probably makes sense that I now look at sustainability from a corporate perspective. And that's when I switched to corporate sustainability.
Right, okay. And so how did you get involved with really I mean, because I could see sustainability being a topic across multiple fields in business. Why strategy?
I guess sorry. It was the most natural. So when I was reading the literature on corporate sustainability, it was the literature, the research I identified the most with. I think that's and you know, econ trained strategy is the most natural fit. But it is based on the articles, based on the papers I was reading. It was essentially the work I identified the most with.
Okay.
But you're right. I mean, sustainability is very broad, correct? And sometimes it's not clear. Well, is it strategy, or is it operations, or is it somewhere else?
Right. So I mean, I noticed that at least some of your more recent publications are co-authored. So you had to make do some networking, I assume, to make the transition into strategy. Tell us a little bit about what that was like from a networking perspective, moving from econ into strategy.
I would say it's less networking. In my case, so I do remember one thing I did is, so my first publication is actually in AMJ, which is quite surprising for an econ trained person, I think. I had a fabulous editor and fabulous reviewer, and I learned so much. I unfortunately don't know who those reviewers are, correct? Mm-hmm. But I learned a lot. And it was also the moment when I started thinking about or kind of strategically analyzing, so what is an AMJ article? What is SMJ? What is management science? And get a sense of what are the different tastes, if there are any differences. I teamed up, so I've greatly enjoyed co-authoring with my co-authors, and very often it was the reason why we co-authored was because I felt they could complement me very well. I don't need necessarily to, I mean, no offense to the economists, but I don't need another economist, correct?
Right.
Like, if I can do it myself, I don't need a co-author, but I could potentially learn from somebody who's more from the OT side. Right. Of things, for example. And this is also what I greatly enjoy. So I have two reading groups. It's going a little off the topic, but I have two reading groups, one in person, one in Skype. Well, you know, pre-COVID, it was one in person, one on Skype. It was even on Skype, not on Zoom. Anyway, and both of these reading groups, so these are 4 people, both are composed of one or two sociologists, 1 or 2 OT scholars, and then me as an economist. I think I have a pretty good idea of what an economist would tell me and where the weaknesses of the paper are. But it's always amazing to learn from the other perspective, correct? And so I feel it can just enrich a study, it can enrich your research, and you learn tremendously a lot by actually be it co-authoring or just having those reading groups, by listening and trying to understand where we come from. And so this is basically how I try to transition towards strategy.
Yeah. So often I ask our guests, you know, what was the biggest challenge in their dissertation project? But I guess here, maybe the more important question was what was the biggest challenge in making the transition to strategy and starting to do strategy research? So you can tackle either one of those questions if you want. I'll leave it up to you.
Or both. So I think during the PhD, the biggest challenges was, one, money.
Sure.
In Europe, you don't get scholarship packages, or in many schools, you don't get scholarship packages. So I financed it myself. And the other aspect was my mom. That was definitely, nothing to do with research.
Nothing to do with research.
Absolutely nothing to do with research. It's really rather the life circumstances. But, you know, I always, as a PhD coordinator, you also realize, man, PhD students are actually human beings. Right? Like they have a life, they have partners, so I think it's also a signal of, we need to think about a scholar, not just about what you see on the paper,
right,
what research they produce, but actually consider the whole human being. Anyway, so that was kind of my challenge during the PhD. The transition to, I don't think it was a challenge per se, but I think it's important. So my take on things, but I think I take the same approach to living in a different country. To me, is if you enter a new field, you want to learn the new culture, you want to learn the new language, and don't always say, oh, it's so much better in this other country, correct? If you're not happy, leave.
Right.
So the same approach I take to research, in a sense of, if I want to be a strategy scholar, I want to understand strategy and I want to speak that language. And so I try. The emphasis is on trying. So maybe one day I'm going to add a 7th language to my number of languages. It's called strategy. But I mean, there are many. So I remember a seminar, for example. And I was presenting my work on employee governance, CSR and employee governance, joint with Xiao Liu. And the paper was entitled, it used to be entitled something about moral hazard. And so the feedback I got just made no sense. I'm like, guys, I know you're intelligent human beings in this room, but what you're telling me makes no sense to me. So what do you understand under moral hazard? To me, moral hazard, principal agent theory, correct?
Right,
Agency
exactly.
theory. To them, it was the temptation to engage in unethical behavior, moral hazard.
Yes, right.
And that's when I realized how brainwashed I was. So again, speak the language, correct? Speak the language of your audience. And it also, I think, forces you to adopt the language that is understood by a broader audience.
Right.
What is your approach, if I may ask?
Well, I mean, in terms of the language I speak, it tends to be more mathematical. So my challenge is always to translate math into something that Earthlings would understand. So making my work accessible to civilians, I always kind of have in the back of my mind a smart second year MBA student, right? Who, as a reader, would this be accessible to a smart second year MBA student? Could they read the front end of the paper, skip over the math, and read the back end of the paper, and still get the point? So that's what I aim for. I don't know how. I don't know whether it's successful or not, but that's at least what I have in mind. So, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good point about speaking the language of the audience that you're talking to. Absolutely. So, your research topic, as you state in your biography, is the antecedents and implications of companies' investments in sustainable practices. So, what do you think are the most important unanswered questions on that topic at this point? What do we not know about companies' investments in sustainable practices that we really ought to know?
A lot. So I would say, I mean, there are many things, correct? But I would say much of the research, including my own, my earlier work at least, has looked at what's the benefit to the company? What's the benefit of the company if they engage in social or environmentally responsible practices? Okay. So does it help improve innovation? Does it help improve employee governance? Does it help, improve your competitiveness, etc.? So focus is very much on the firm level, which probably makes sense because we are strategy scholars. But what about the system? What's actually the impact on the broader system, on the environment, and on societies? And how does that help? Does it help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and really tackle the grand societal challenges that we are facing? Okay, so I think there's an enormous research gap. In my view, we are almost entirely focused kind of at the firm level, not keeping in our eyesight the broader picture. And to put it differently, I think there's an enormous opportunity to contribute to research in that aspect. But of course, this is also more kind of interdisciplinary work, potentially.
Right, right. Yeah, it's
and I would say, another aspect, but I don't think another aspect is how can we trigger. So one issue, one challenge in this literature or in ESG, environment, social governance aspects in general is companies in most countries don't need to disclose non-financial information. Okay, so that means the basis, the data, the source of information is voluntarily disclosed. And so my sense is we don't get better measures unless governments enforce, make it mandatory to disclose non-financial information. So then it's a related question. So how can we get there? And arguably with better measures, it would probably also help tackle some other research questions.
Right, okay.
Where do you see, where's the gap, or what are you tired of seeing?
Well, I don't usually work in this area of sustainability, although I did review one paper, which was a formal model of NGO behavior, and that was interesting, but not my work. Um, so from my perspective, what's interesting about it is the management of the dual, the conflicting pressures between dual objectives, right?
Mission.
Yeah, and so because in economics we know a lot about kind of um, optimizing a single objective function, right? And you know, is it simply a matter of uh, optimizing a convex combination of two objective functions, or what is it? And maybe it'd be interesting to see how managers think about these two objectives. Are they dealt with in a kind of a lexicographic fashion where we fulfill one first, and then if we can do a little of the other, then we do that, or is it how are the preferences ordered between the two objectives, and why would be something of interest to me as an economics trained person.
I agree. This is definitely a very interesting area. It's also what you see in practice going on. Quite more and more companies shift towards a dual mission.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a small but burgeoning literature researchers that tackle exactly that question. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Okay. So good. Yeah, that's what I would find to be interesting in that literature. Good. So let me see what else I wanted to ask you. So what lessons have you learned so far in your career that could be helpful to us?
I would say many things, but one critical thing, and I think potentially this is hopefully valuable for especially the more junior scholars. No offense, Rich. But so when I was at Ivy, and my great friend, co-author and former colleague, Tima Bansal, so I remember she pushed me on a question all the time. So I think I was in my second year junior faculty, and I had already, I think, about 3 A's and a couple of R&Rs. And she kept on asking me, Caroline, where do you want to have impact? What do you want to achieve? Where do you want to have impact? And, in my mind, I thought, publishing? Like, isn't publishing enough? Wait. It took me a while to understand. I think I understand what you meant. I do. And it's really about thinking about long term. Forget about tenure, getting full, etc. But really, in the long term, where do you want to have impact? What do you really care about? Correct? And then go back in time to now and work on projects that are aligned with that long-term goal. Each project takes a hell of a time. As you know, I'm Swiss, so time is valuable, correct? It's probably your most valuable resource besides your intelligence. And so you really want to work on projects that help you achieve that long-term goal. And so a year or 2 years ago, I was a senior faculty, post-tenure faculty in a junior workshop, and it was kind of a mentoring session for juniors. And many of the junior faculty were really freaked out about tenure, nervous. Frequently a comment was about, I don't know what they want, I don't know what my department expects me to do, and networking, I don't know what. And to me, I think many of these headaches really are no headaches anymore if you really just think about what do you want? What do you want to achieve? And then you align those projects with that long-term goal. And, it's like there are situations you probably need to decline invitations to work on a paper.
Yeah.
There is one keyword: you don't decline, you just postpone. Some of those projects magically disappear, and I think that's probably one insight. So I'm grateful, deeply grateful to Tiba for pushing me on that one, because I think it's important.
Now, I noticed your latest publication is actually in finance. So you made the transition from econ to strategy, and now learning to speak yet another language, finance. So tell us a little bit about what that was like.
So, so I wouldn't say. So one recent phenomena in sustainable finance, responsible investing, I mean, this whole sustainability, corporate governance, shareholder engagement, that's very much at the intersection between, finance, accounting,
right,
strategy, correct? Like this is really, you need to keep you should be fluent in all the literatures. Now, when you look at practice, what's going on in practice, there's an enormous, upwind. There's a lot of action going on in sustainable finance. The Principle of Responsible Investing, that's the largest global network. So I'm the chair of the academic advisory board of that network. The number of signatories has exploded over the years. And so there's a lot of traction. Anyway, so one relatively new financial innovation is what is called corporate green bonds. So these are bonds whose proceeds are committed to finance environmental friendly projects. And so I picked up on this because I've been engaging with practitioners quite a bit, but there's no research on this, correct? Or there wasn't really on this. And I was very curious because if you look at government regulation, there is no public policy regulating this. So from a legal perspective, corporate green bonds are no different from regular bonds. And so there is an enormous risk that companies essentially just engage in greenwashing, claiming that they would use the proceeds to invest in green projects, but at the end of the day, they invest in kind of regular coal or whatever brown projects, right? And so I was very curious to understand, well, is this a real thing? So in absence of government action about climate change, which in many countries seems to be happening, correct? So in absence of government action, could corporate green bonds potentially serve as an instrument that companies can use to push forward and improve the environmental footprint and basically help mitigate climate change? And so, in other words, I was curious to know, well, first of all, what's the financial implication of issuing green bonds? How does the stock market react? But also, does it really help improve the environmental footprint of companies? And if so, how? And so this is the project. And then, so I did the project and I was wondering, okay, so which journal should I submit it to? And I felt the potential impact would be probably the more natural home would be a finance journal.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity about the phenomenon, can companies, I don't know, just trying to think about that informational problem that you were mentioning. Can companies hire an accounting firm to audit their use of the funds?
So what has stepped in, because there's an absence of government regulation,
right?
Absence, they are bound to the regular bond regulation, correct? But there's not really a difference between green bond and regular bond. So what has stepped in is certification organizations. And actually, so this is also what I look at. What does certification of these bonds play a role at all or not? And it does. So all the key insights of this study are that green bonds, first of all, help improve firm value. So it's beneficial to the company, but it also helps improve the environmental footprint of the companies. And these effects are driven by those bonds that are certified. So there's definitely a concern for greenwashing, but not for the certified, or to mitigate their concern. Companies certify those bonds.
Okay, yeah, so there is that informational solution. Yeah, I figured there must be something. So, okay, so you decided to send it to finance. Was was there a notable difference in the process of getting it published in a finance journal versus a strategy journal?
The most notable difference was you have to actually pay when you submit.
Oh, okay. That's true.
I don't think, I mean, no, I wouldn't say so. I mean, you know, it's more phenomena based, but you still need to think. So from a theoretical point of view, what you expect, you still need to have some theoretical understanding of what you expect to be going on, and then test it. So I would say at the end of the day, so in my view, and I actually just had a panel, an editorial panel for the Global Scholars this morning. In my view, high quality research should find its home regardless. And then, yes, you need to engage with the literature, correct? Engage with the literature in finance, engage with the literature in strategy. But in my view, you should be aware of any sort of literature on that topic anyway. So, yeah. And then,
there was no special way to write for the finance audience or something like that, other than to cite their literature?
It's not just about citing, correct? It's engaging, intellectually engaging with the literature in that sense. I mean, yes, there is a different style, but you also have differences in style between management science and org science and AMJ, SMJ, correct? So this is, again, try to learn the language, understand how do they do things, but at the end of the day, like, what do you study and how do you go about the research? To me, this is regardless, I would pursue it the same way. You try to understand the world and what's going on. I don't know. So I know there are different opinions about this one, but that's kind of my perspective.
Okay.
What is yours?
I've never tried to publish in a finance journal, so I don't really have, any experience to draw on. I'm more of a middle of the road SMJ kind of guy, but maybe someday I'll have a topic that will appeal to.
So I've noticed you have tons of single authored papers, correct?
Yeah, early in my career. More early in my career, but lately I've been enjoying working with other human beings, and particularly doctoral students. So it's been a while since I've done anything single authored, but I think it is important for junior faculty to do some single authored work just to prove to the market that they have the capability. But I find that working with co-authors helps me stay more motivated because now I've got someone else I'm accountable to, and that really helps me. So you've served now as the PhD coordinator at BU for, I think, 3 years. What's the most important piece of advice that you give to the doctoral students at BU?
First, time. Time is your most valuable resource, besides your intelligence. So really focus, tool up, especially during the first 2 years, correct? Tool up on methods, study, learn, and engage with the literature. And then I would say what I mentioned before, like think about what do you want? Where do you want to have impact?
Where do you want to have?
And that will automatically create your research identity, correct? If you think, I'm Swiss, as you know by now. Mm-hmm. If you think about the mountain top, if you know which mountain you want to climb up,
yes,
sure, keep that mountain top in sight with whatever project you're doing and align your project such that it helps you get closer. I mean, in my case, I walked up a hill and only realized later, there's actually a mountain behind it. Actually, it's a beautiful mountain. Mm-hmm. So don't do this.
Know where the peak is from the start. Yeah.
But really think of where do you want to have impact. And by doing this, you will automatically form your research identity. You will automatically engage with the people in the profession that may become your letter writers.
Right.
So all those, what you hear in kind of faculty development workshops about, you need to network with the potential advisors. You need to think about research identity. To me, this feels artificial.
Mm-hmm.
I think to me, it's much more natural to think about okay, again, I'm Swiss, correct? So pardon me. Think about what's your long-term target, and you will automatically engage with the people. One thing also, and maybe this is in my editor head, one thing that helped me a lot to build up the network is actually reviewing. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something many folks don't or underappreciate or don't realize is if you do a high quality job and provide a constructive and valuable feedback to the authors, it not only is super helpful to the authors, correct? But it actually, well, on one hand, helps make our profession more humane. And this is, to me, one of the strongest ways to actually network and build up your network with potential advisors. So in a sense of, I would not underestimate this, that right. Especially as a reviewer, you're anonymous, correct? So people don't really know you, but the editor sees what you're doing. And if you stick out there, it's a strong signal of who you are as a scholar.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So yeah, that's all great. Yeah, you mentioned your experience as an editor. Is there anything that you've learned in your role as an editor that would help our doctoral students or junior faculty to think through what they're doing and be more effective?
So on one hand, I have like a research protocol, but it's me as an author, where I have like 8 key questions kind of that I try to play through. So one is, what's your research question? Wait, let me pull it up. I think that might be easiest. Good that I gave a presentation this morning.
Oh, okay. Hey, John, can you make Carolyn co-host so we can see her screen?
I think I can. 1 second.
Okay.
Actually, it doesn't matter. I don't find it right away. So what's your research question? What's the research gap? Why do we care about filling that gap? Right? Why should everybody care? Then what's your theoretical argument? How do you measure your theoretical constructs? What's your identification strategy? What's the result? What's your interpretation? And then what's the implication for practice? So these are kind of 8 questions that are played through my mind, but this is more me as an author. But I would say, do research that you care about and hopefully everybody else cares about, and try to engage with the subject. Try to understand as opposed to just telling a story. This is one thing, kind of really be rigorous, try to understand and engage with the phenomena. The other thing...
And probably a good idea not to submit a paper before you actually have answers to all 8 of those questions.
The other thing is, I think, perceive the editors as on your side. They try to help you develop the paper. They try to help you dig deeper, understand, and really help shape and improve your study. Same with the reviewers, correct? So engage with them, reply to their questions, respond to their questions, etc. I learned a great deal. So I would say my transition to strategy from econ, I owe it so much to my editors and my reviewers. I mean, some of them, yes, they've been tough. Several of them have been very tough. Right. But it made my research so much better. I learned a lot. And I think if you have that mindset of they're not your enemies, they're actually helping you, I think it changes the way you approach things. I hope at least that's what I hope, that I signal to the papers that I handle and to the authors.
Yes, great advice. Thank you very much for tolerating our ritual of the celebrity talk show. We really appreciate that.